Josh Hoover needs a big game from Josh Hoover just as much as TCU needs a big game from Josh Hoover. Oh, yeah, it's locked on. I guess it's locked on Horned Frogs. Play my music.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? I am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South. You already know it's your favorite daily one-stop shop for everything TCU athletics, Monday through Friday and twice on Saturdays these days. But you know it better as Locked On Horned Frogs. Thank you for making this your first listen of the day every day and making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in the country. It's your team every day, and we're doing a heavy focus on Josh Hoover before getting into what could stop the bounce back performance from the TCU defense. But here's the deal. Josh Hoover needs a big game. Oh, I know, what a special take that Josh Hoover, the quarterback of a pass-heavy offense, needs to have a big game if they're going to win. Yes, that's the obvious way to look at it, and yes, that's true. We'll get into it. But also, Josh Hoover needs a big game for Josh Hoover. It feels as if Hoover is struggling to have a signature moment in this game, or in this season. I think that Josh Hoover is a talented quarterback. I think that Josh Hoover is a guy who throws the football well. He has a lot of good moments. But what's his signature moment in 2025? What is the signature moment for Josh Hoover in the 2025 season that is positive? What's the moment where you felt like Josh Hoover had to get it and he got it? This is not to be a criticism, and I understand how that sounds, but this is a bit of a knock against how his season is in totality. This is not to be a criticism of who he is as a player, but I do think that coming into the 2025 season, you're coming off of a year in which you had the most passing yards in TCU history. Everybody's riding high. Everybody's expecting you to accelerate and ascend. People are talking about Hoover for Heisman. There's a lot of hype, especially after those first 2-3 games. You came out against North Carolina, team absolutely smoked them. You went against Abilene Christian, FCS, yes, but you were perfect. Every single drive that Hoover was on the field, TCU scored a touchdown. You go against SMU, and I thought that he showed phenomenal mobility. He showed legs that you didn't know that he had. Whoa. But he showed you a little bit of something special. Then you get to the Arizona State game, and you feel like, man, you guys are firing. Good job, offense. 17-0. You're feeling good. That could have been the signature moment, but it wasn't, because we know how that ended up. So it's all right, cool. Everything cools down. Hoover still has another year of eligibility. It's not as if his career is over after this season, but I do feel like with all of the hype that's going on, with all of the justified expectations that were placed on Josh Hoover, there's not the signature moment that makes this season special when we thought it was going to be a special year in general for Hoover. I think that he needs that for himself. I think you're talking about draft stock. That's something that could benefit that aspect of it. You're looking at just the team in general. Yes, they need a big game from Josh Hoover. I've called this BYU light when talking about this version of the Cougs, right? You went from the Cougars to the Cougs. You went from BYU to UH. This, to me, is just a lesser version of BYU. Not in the way of being an insult. BYU came through and thumped TCU. So this is not any way to say it's a degrading description of UH, but they're not as good as BYU. They're not. But they do possess some of the same qualities. They pull out close games. All right? A defining moment can be Josh Hoover leading a drive against a top 25 team that secures a victory, secures an upset. On a slot that's, they have a little bit of competition, but this isn't the most stacked weekend in college football. They'll be competing against Oregon versus USC. But by the time that game's over, you'll be in the clutch moments of TCU versus Houston. So these are things that I look at. These are things that I evaluate when talking about them. Because look, I don't care how good of a quarterback you are. I don't care how good of a quarterback you are. If you're on a team that's unsuccessful, 8-9 times out of 10, you're not going to be spoken about. Yes, you had guys like Jaden Daniels, who wins the Heisman from an LSU team that's not playing well, that's not winning, but that's also LSU. And this is TCU. And Josh Hoover was not one of, even though Daniels wasn't at that time either. But Josh Hoover is not one of the 2-3 quarterbacks that everybody in the world was talking about coming into the year. And maybe that's the part where I really look at it with a sense of urgency. I think it is. Like, as I begin to brainstorm and I talk out loud and I have my stream of consciousness, I realize that that is also probably the biggest aspect for Hoover. Hoover was not one of the 2-3 quarterbacks that they were talking about coming into the year. Now, granted, those 2-3 quarterbacks that people talked about, put them away. They didn't do that well this year. The Allers, the Sellers, the Mannings, right? They didn't do that well. You had a new crop of guys who came in. And it felt like Hoover could have been one of those new crop who came in, but he wasn't. And I think the thing that's lacking is team success. He only has so much of control over that. But then the other aspect is the signature moment. That can come in maybe a shootout. Maybe him and Wigman get into a shootout and it's like 400 yards for each quarterback or something like that. That could be a signature moment. You would probably prefer a victory, but fine, that you'll take that. It's on Fox, 3 o'clock, one of the premier games of the slot. I would like to see a Josh Hoover game-winning drive. That's what I would like to see. I think there's been 2 times in which I said, all right, Josh Hoover signature moment. It happened twice in the Arizona State game. I think it happened one time in another matchup that I can't remember. But I've been looking for the Josh Hoover signature moment all season long. I think that he has too. It hasn't happened yet. And to me, when you want to elevate your status, that's a big part of it. It is. As far as the TCU part goes, UH is a good pass defense. They're a good run defense. TCU doesn't run the ball often or really well when they do it. You're going to put all of the pressure on Hoover. And it's not fair to him, but that is how life goes. That is the quarterback. You are going to put a lot of pressure on Josh Hoover. And I think both teams need it. I think both parties need it, both Hoover and TCU. But we're going to move past this, and we're going to take a look at Amari Thomas, because I think he's the player on Houston that could absolutely derail TCU's attempt at having a bounce-back game, though bouncing back does feel very likely. Let's get into that whole thing as we continue with Locked On Horned Frogs. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app if you want to have any fun. Literally, any fun that needs a ticket, go to Gametime. I was on the phone with my friend for, I swear, about 30, 40 minutes. It maybe even was an hour. And we were talking about a bunch of stuff, but the conversation revolved around, hey, let's go to Gametime and look at these tickets. Let's see if we want to go to somewhere late in the season for a game. All right, no, let's try to see what games look like or price what games may look like next year. This is literally the conversation that a friend and I had on Thursday night, right before the Thursday night game, actually. So I'm always talking about Gametime. You need to always be going to Gametime. That's how I feel. If you're not always going to Gametime, you need to start today, because maybe you're new. Maybe you're new and you get $20 off. You use the code LOCKEDONCollege. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege and get $20 off your first purchase. Now let's move forward, because today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. And FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's the only place that I trust to make a little bit of extra cash. I like making money. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong for that, but I like to make money. And I think that you should like to make money as well. FanDuel allows you to do that on things that you already know, like your TCU Horned Frogs, who are only 1.5-point underdogs in this game. If you think that they're going to pull off the upset, put the money on the Frogs. If you think that they're going to lose by exactly 1 point, put the money on the Frogs. This is pretty much a toss-up. Do you think they win? Do you think they lose? You think they win or you think they lose? But either way, go to FanDuel and put some money down on it. Matter of fact, put some money down on HOOVERMANIA. Josh Hoover, Josh Hoover, Josh Hoover, Josh Hoover. As we continue rolling and closing out today's live episode of Locked On Horned Frogs, I think we're not going to do this next Saturday, actually. I was going to say I think we're going to keep doing this on Saturdays. I will be out of town. I'll be back visiting family, so we will not be doing this on Saturday. I don't even know if we'll have a Saturday show, depending on what time the game is. If the game is 1 o'clock, you won't be seeing your boy on Saturday. I will be on the road. If the game is late, then maybe, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. Chances are most likely you're not going to see me on Saturday at all. So let's enjoy these 2 days as they last. But Amari Thomas is a player who I think can absolutely destroy the attempted bounce back game for TCU's defense. TCU's defense has been solid this year. I like a lot of the things that they've done. I think that they have handled running quarterbacks decent. I actually think I would say they've done it well. They've had their moments where they haven't, but I think all in all, they've done a solid job of handling running quarterbacks. I think that Caleb Elarms or Nnamdi Obiizor, that linebacking duo, has popped up. Jamel Johnson has popped up as a star in that backfield, right along with Bud Clark. You like what the TCU defense has done. Like, I like what TCU defense has done this year. They didn't play well on Saturday. They simply didn't. BYU came in and whatever they wanted, they took. They wanted it, they got it. Point blank, period. And in that, it was an embarrassing display on both sides of the ball, and it made the game feel overall worse. It was the first time that I felt like the defense was absolutely outclassed, had no business on the field with who they were on the field with. Yeah, against against University of Houston, I think that you should be able to bounce back. I don't think that Wegman's as good as Bear Bachmeier. I don't think that offense has been as efficient. And with that, you want to just have a solid day. Let's just use the linebackers to control Wegman. Let's look at everything that you could do in that front seven. But then you get to the wide receiver, Amari Thomas. And the cornerbacks have been the vulnerable spot for the TCU defense. So I'm looking at a Thomas that has 797 yards, I believe it was. 797 yards on the year. He's the leading receiver for TCU or for University of Houston. Excuse me. I apologize for mixing these up. But Amari Thomas is a guy who can threaten any hopes of a bounce back because he also threatens what you do the worst. So if there was any side of the ball that I thought wasn't going to shake back, or any part of the defense that I didn't think would shake back, it'd be the corners, right? Like, I think that's a pretty simple one. I have too many tabs up to really find where he is, but let me make sure I have his stats. I want to make sure it's 797 because for some reason I want to put him in a different category. But no, he's at 737, excuse me. So 737 last week against Oklahoma State, in Oklahoma State a couple weeks ago, he had 157 yards. Last week, he had 103 yards. So you're looking at 200-yard performances in the last, month and a half. He did have 104 against Oregon State, but just solely looking at the conference performances, big game versus Oklahoma State, averaging 22 yards per catch. Against Texas Tech, they didn't have a great performance. He did have a 64-yard catch in that game. He had a 52-yard catch versus Arizona. He had a 43-yard catch versus Oklahoma State, had a 64-yard catch versus Central Florida. So you're seeing a guy who has stretched the field on multiple times. He's dynamic with the ball in his hands. I really like this Amari Thomas guy. I'm not going to lie to you. When I just sit back and I watch Houston football, I said, okay, that's a good receiver. I enjoy watching him. I think that he could tear up the TCU secondary. And if you want to have a backup, a bounce back, you can't let that happen. Now, a couple things as we go around before we leave, because it's just a quick little Sunday or Saturday morning. This is, like I said, not a really stacked game. I actually think that this is one of the more watchable games that people might care about. Like in the Big 12, you just have Cincinnati versus BYU, and that's at 7. At 2:30 in just the country, you have Oregon versus USC. That's a big game. I'll be checking out the first 30 minutes of that game for sure, right? I'll be sitting down on the couch with an alarm that says 3 o'clock because TCU comes on at 3. But from 2:30 to 3, you'll be watching the Oregon USC game. There's not really a lot of games to distract from this. TCU fans may not be happy about it, but there's not a lot of games that are going to distract from this TCU Houston matchup. It's on Fox. I think a lot of people are going to watch, especially those last maybe 10 or so minutes of the game. That's why I say Josh Hoover's signature moment could be a true signature moment where everybody's watching. It's not a Friday night game like it was versus Arizona State where the whole world only had one choice to watch. But Josh Hoover needs this signature game, in my opinion, just as much as TCU needs it from him. TCU needs it because Houston stops the run. They stop the pass. TCU doesn't run the football often or well. So you need to put all the pressure on your quarterback. Okay, fine. That's basic. That's simple. But Josh Hoover needs this game because Josh Hoover needs a signature moment. I think that coming off of his season last year, we thought that this whole season was going to be a signature. It hasn't turned out to be that way. But building a little bit of momentum going into 2026 with a signature moment against a top 25 team, a game that would be an upset, a game that by betting odds is a toss-up, 1.5 point. But at the same time, I talk to and I see a lot of TCU fans speaking. It doesn't feel like a toss-up. It feels like despair. So this is a game where if Josh Hoover shows up, especially shows up in the clutch, it'll be one that's talked about. And because it's so late, could carry on into 2026. So I think a top 25 team is a great team to do that against. But we'll see you after the game. It starts at 3 Central, so I'll probably be here around 6:30. Yeah, probably around 6:30. Starts at 3. Yeah, I expect that's probably around the time I'll be here. So in a few hours, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.